All right. So here's the deal. SAQs, it's one of those things. Some people struggle with it and they always will because they just want to do it their own way forever. Other people kind of get it. They get it right off the bat. SAQs are not that hard. All right. You got to know what you're talking about, but they're not long. All right. We do that ACE format for a reason. You'll see other acronyms. People do it a little bit different, but 3 sentences, maybe 4 should do it. And the key thing is, yeah, you need something specific, something to latch onto. It's not always going to be vocab. Sometimes if you explain a situation well enough, even if you don't have the exact term, you can still get credit. But if you can use some sort of term or name or person or place or something concrete to then go into more depth in, you're going to get the points every time. So to kind of show you the process, and again, we'll keep it kind of brief. Let's all look at the short answer questions from 2018. I think I actually have mine up and running. Where are they? Okay, here we go. So a couple years ago, these were actually on the AP test. Very indicative of the level of difficulty you're going to see. Now, you're always going to have 4 sets. 3 of them you do, 1 of them you don't have to. So first step, look over the directions because, it's going to be the day of the test and you're going to be half out of your mind. You stayed up all night studying or whatever, Again, look at the instructions that are there. But essentially what you need to do is scan. The first one is always going to be a secondary source, all right? Now, we've done some of these. We haven't done them enough. So when we start practicing like in class, we'll mainly focus on this. We've mainly focused on the standalone ones. But these are actually easier more often than not. Because rather than you going in there and looking for an answer or really writing directly about the source, which is a mistake people make, this is supposed to point you in the right direction. Okay, that's all it is. So you got your secondary source. We'll look at that here in a second. The second one is always going to be a primary source. Now you're going to see something like this, and you're going to say, what in the heck is that? And you're going to be scanning the picture like, well, I see a British flag and blah, blah, blah. Guys, I'll be honest, you usually don't even have to look at it because it's always going to have a description. So here, it's an engraving produced in Great Britain based on 1817 painting by British artist Benjamin West. So you got to start thinking, what do I know about Great Britain in the 1800s? But then 99% of the time, they got an explanation. Okay, because some of these pictures, it's hard to tell what's going on, especially if it's like a really old painting and the artwork's not very good. It's not always going to be a painting, but they like to throw at least one picture in there usually. You always look at the description. Glance at the artwork, but look at the description. The engraving shows a historical encounter in 1765 in which the Mughal Emperor Shah Alam II granted the British East India Company, represented by Robert Clive, the right to collect tax revenue from the Mughal provinces of Bengal, Orissa, and Bihar. So now you know what's in there, okay? It's not that the answer's there, but there's enough hints. Okay, it's got to do with the Mughals. It's got to do with the British. This joint stock company here, the British East India Company. I mean, even before you get into the questions, you can start thinking, well, what do I know about all these different groups together? Then you'll have 3 and 4. Now, we're not going to really look at these just for time constraints because I do want to really get into the other ones, but they're always the standalone ones, all right? You get to choose one or the other. This is from a couple years ago, so this included some of the older stuff, like back ancient times. So, like here, you're not going to see anything from 600 CE. Like our starting point is 1200. You could see some of this stuff, Green Revolution. You just kind of went into that in your project, but let's not worry about that right now. Here's what I want you guys to do, and there's only a few of you. Take a couple minutes, glance through those first 2 sets of questions. Here's what I want you to do. I'm not going to make you write them because you're here of your own free will, and that would be torture, and you're going to have to do that one day. But all I want you to do, from 1 and 2, decide which one's the easiest. If you had to write it, which one would you write? If you were running out of time and you only got 12 minutes, which one of these are you the most sure that you would get the points? Then, and you guys can talk about this while you do it. You don't have to do it all silently. Okay, and this is only going to be like 5 minutes. look at each one of these questions and start brainstorming kind of what your answer could be. Now, I'm not saying, talk about the whole 3 or 4 sentences, but what's the foundation? Like, what's that term? What's that idea? What's that person? What's that place that you could use to build an answer off of? So take about 4 or 5 minutes. You can talk amongst yourselves or you can do it independently, but I'm going to ask you guys some questions about this stuff here in a second. Understand what's going on? Just the first 2 sets. Don't worry about 3 and 4. I think after a couple glances, you're going to see which one's way easier than the other. Not that really even the other one's all that hard. And Miranda, here in a second, when we're talking about it, feel free to speak up. You're in on this too. First one's pretty darn easy.
Well, we just learned about
it is fresh, but I think it's broad enough also.
Fresh in the brain.
It's fresh in the brain, but you got a lot of options. If you had a chance to glance at number 2 yet, give it a gander. Now, the cool thing is, while you guys are doing that, if you can multitask, I just can't be quiet for very long, unfortunately. That's why I talk so much. On the College Board website, if you look for them, and I forget what part it's under, but they release all of their past essays, and SAQs, DBQs, all that stuff. They don't release the multiple choice because they're evil.
They reuse them.
What? Yes and no. They use them for secure exams. That way we can do mock tests and the answers aren't out there. That's the main thing. And it's not that they reuse them word for word, but they pretty much reuse them. They reuse them. They reword them a little bit, revamp them, put them back into circulation. But the good thing is just kind of looking, especially if you're confused about a DBQ or an LEQ, just to get some ideas, SAQ too, of how you can structure these things, go look at the examples, okay? Because you can download these. Underneath this file in Canvas, I've got sample responses from all 4 of these questions, or all 4 sets. And the cool thing the College Board does, and it's for teachers, but it's for y'all more than anything, they'll show you the prompt, whatever it is, they'll show you responses, they'll show you exactly what would get the point, what wouldn't get the point, and then you get some samples. And if you ever want to grade them yourself and then kind of compare your grade to the College Board's grade, once you can do that, man, these aren't that bad. So can we agree question or set number 1's easier? Okay, so let's start there, okay? Because you always want to start with the easiest one first. So you got your primary source or secondary source document. I'll be honest, you could almost answer the questions without it. And sometimes, guys, that's a secret. On these multiple choice questions, on the SAQ, okay, those are the ones that you could sometimes do this on. Sometimes, you need to glance over it, but it's more, what does this remind you of? What direction does it point you in? Sometimes just looking at the time period or who it's from, you can answer the questions just based on that. So here, yeah, you do need to read it, but man, some of this stuff without ever reading it. It's not like there's any answers here for you. It's just there to kind of get you thinking along the right lines. So you got this historian or this political scientist, Rudolf Rummel, United States political scientist, death by government. This is actually important where it comes from, 1994. Okay, that's going to have a big impact on C. So the more power a government has, the more it can act arbitrarily according to the whims and desires of the elite. And the more it will make war on others and murder its foreign and domestic subjects. The more constrained the power of governments, the more power is diffused, checked, balanced. The less it will aggress on others and commit mass violence. At the extremes of power, totalitarian governments slaughter their people by the tens of millions. In contrast, many democracies can barely bring themselves to execute even serial murderers. So I actually graded this one a few years ago, and I can't tell you how many people just wrote about serial killers. I'm serious. Like, well, let's talk about Jack the Ripper. Let's talk about, it was weird because they just took that and they ran with it. And that's mainly what they did like for C. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff on serial killers, which was, I don't know, it was interesting, but, didn't really answer the question. Because again, you want to confine your answers to things that we've actually studied in this class. So let's look at A. Identify one historical example of mass violence that was committed by a totalitarian state. Here's the key: in the 20th century. What do you guys got? Give me an example. Hitler, okay, the Holocaust. Russian, Stalin, okay, you can pretty much just say his name. There's some specific stuff like the Great Purge with Stalin, some other stuff like that, but even bring up his name, if you described what he did enough, that would be good. Anything else that we studied in the 20th century? Rape in Nanjing would work. Well, no, that would work perfectly, okay? I was thinking on B it wouldn't work, but yes, that would work perfectly on A. You could talk about, you could get into the Rwandan genocide, not the best example. You could talk about Mao Zedong in China, great leap forward, cultural revolution. That's what we're looking for, okay? Those are totalitarian states that did these terrible things, okay? So obviously you're gonna have to dress it up. You can't just say, well, Joseph Stalin. And unfortunately, that's what a lot of people do, okay? Or maybe they'll just say, the Holocaust was really bad. What is the Holocaust? I mean, of course I know what it is, but you haven't shown me that you know what it is. So you need to take it a step further. But yeah, stuff like that. The names of the people you just mentioned, the events you just mentioned, that's the basis of a good answer. Okay, then you just need to explain yourselves. You need to go into a little bit more detail. Now it's going to get a little bit tougher, but it's really not that bad. B, explain one historical example of a democratic state, so you got to think democratic states, committing mass violence that would challenge Rummel's argument. Because he's saying it's just the totalitarian regimes are out just killing people. Democracies. Is that true? What can you guys think of where a democracy, like maybe us, have committed or sponsored mass violence? There's a lot of definitions. There's a lot of ways you can go.
They didn't really kill all the Japanese.
Okay, I don't know. You could bring that into it. You could. I think you could form the argument that maybe like the atomic bombs were excessive or something like that. You could go there, but again, it's got to be mass violence. So the internment camps, that might be a cool detail to bring in if you're talking about something related to that. But that alone, and debatable. But what else? The U.S. isn't perfect, and we're not the only democracy out there. Well, the bombs, yeah, that would work.
Be like, they killed other people.
Who? Okay, let me lead you in the right direction. How did we start off as a country? Like, were we always the same size? Okay. If you look at the racial breakdown of the United States, I think it's 0.7% Native American. Before the Europeans showed up, it was 100%. So you've got that right there. You could talk about, the genocide of the Native Americans. That would work. You could talk about, you could get into a lot of stuff here. They don't say 20th century. That's the secret. Okay? You could get into the slave trade. You could talk about, violence during the civil rights movement. You could talk about the Vietnam War. It's a war, but if you made the argument that it was unjustified and it was just to stop communism and maybe bring in things like we talked about, like the My Lai massacre and stuff like that, you could bring that up. What were the Europeans doing in the 1800s and 1900s? A lot of them were kind of democratic. The British were. They were involved in that too. Guys, what about imperialism? What about taking over Africa? What about, when they took over India and there was the big Sepoy rebellion? Those are the sort of things to pull off of. And again, the more specific you can be, the better. But if you explain yourself enough, even if you can't find the name of the rebellion, If you explain yourself well enough and it's very clear what you're talking about and you give some detail, you can still get the points. Last one, let's look at this. C. Explain one development in the late 20th century. So this is confining it, okay? So you're looking late 20th century, I'd say 1960s on. Okay, 1960s to 2000. Okay, I think you could get into that territory because if you go before 1950, you're clearly not in the late 20th century. But explain one development in the late 20th century that likely shaped Rummel's view of the relationship between democracy and mass violence. Keep in mind, he wrote this in 1994. And he's American.
The Cold War.
Boom. There's other examples, but guys, that's periodization. As long as you kind of know more or less what's happening in the time period, you don't have to know really specific years. Like Cold War, pretty much over in 91, debatably. But think about it, you know.
And he's a political scientist.
He's a political scientist. He's an American. You know, a lot of the totalitarian regimes he's probably talking about, they're people that we fought at one point or another. Democracy triumphs. We're the best. Communists and everybody else are just evil.
We're so good, we can't even kill our own serial murderers.
Guys, exactly.
We're just
Guys, you just broke out historical context. And if that was a document in the DBQ, that would go towards your point for sourcing. That's all it is. You know, all these things. I said it was BS earlier. It's not really BS, but there's no way to know it's true. It's just you drawing conclusions. That's it. And that makes sense. This guy maybe doesn't even know what the Cold War is. Now, obviously he does, but we don't really know why he's saying this. But we can speculate based on the time period, 1994, based on the fact that, you know, America has just been triumphant. The Cold War's done. Communism is dying, seemingly. We can assume that informed what he said. All right, so let's look at some samples, and then we'll do number 2 like this, and then we'll call it a day. You don't have to download this or anything, but it's in there. They got the sample student response. Like I said, they do this for all of the writing. So like, you know, a few months after the AP test is over, I don't think they did it last year because it was weird, but they'll publish this stuff about the same time that scores come out. So they start off, they'll show you the thing, tells you how you're going to be scored. It's a little bit different than what I do it. Here, there's one thing you have to do, okay? Technically, for A, because it says identify, if you just said the Holocaust, you might get points there because you did identify it. If it says explain, I always say it, identify and explain because you're covering both bases. But if it says explain, then yeah, a lot more depth is needed. But the standard for just identify, I mean, I don't know. I'd hate to give them credit for just saying the Holocaust, but they did identify, okay? So take that for what it's worth. But sometimes it'll have like 2 things you need to do. Again, you get a point for everything that you need to do here. All right, so what are the examples of things that they said would work? And this is for number 1, the Holocaust. We didn't really get into it. I think they talked about it a little bit in the reading you did for your project, but Khmer Rouge, that group in Cambodia that killed everybody, they get really specific here in the Ukraine, you know, the specific group that Stalin was killing. But again, we know Stalin was eliminating a lot of people. The Great Terror, the Great Purge, sometimes it's called, Stalin getting rid of all of his enemies. Mao Zedong, anything that he did, Great Leap Forward, Cultural Revolution. For number 2, you know, examples. European states during, you know, Scramble for Africa. British soldiers committing mass violence against indigenous populations in Australia. We didn't really get into that. It's not really a part of the curriculum anymore, but they did that, very similar to what we did to Native Americans. We briefly mentioned it, you know, firebombing. You know, all sides in World War II did this, and it was just to kill people. It was just to really scare the crap out of the population that we were fighting against. I mean, we did that. We're a democracy. And then, you know, on the last one, Cold War stuff, you know, you could talk about, you know, all the liberal ideas that spread after World War II. There's a lot of different ways to go. So let's look at some examples, okay? This one's good, all right? And they get a little less good as we go. But this one, it's not exactly the ACE format, but it's pretty darn close. They hit all the bases. So A, this was the identify. Again, they went above and beyond. Identify one example of mass violence by a totalitarian regime. One historical example of mass violence that was committed by a totalitarian state in the 20th century was Russia under the rule of Joseph Stalin. I'll tell you, if it said identified, that probably technically would be enough. But I don't know, that's borderline. Give a little bit more. If it said identify and explain, you would definitely need more. Well, they take it like that. His 5-year plans and issues of collectivization, taking people away from, I can't even say what that says, something, is that what it says? From their, okay, I can't read. Taking property away from peasants because it is for everyone, i.e. the government, caused mass starvation in the lower class population, killing almost or about or around millions of people. Because again, they weren't sure about 12. That's enough, okay? And they could say 12, maybe it was 6. It's all good because we look past little mistakes like that. If there's enough good there, you're good. For B, they did use Rwanda, the genocide that occurred in Rwanda with all the Hutus executing the Tutsis to ethnically cleanse Rwanda. Again, they identify, they kind of explain a little bit more would be helpful, and they gave it. Rwanda had become a democratic state, yet the genocide of the Tutsis still continued. That gets it. This one, they really go full force. One development that occurred in the late 20th century that likely shaped Rummel's view of the relationship between democracy and mass violence is the rise of communism. Okay, well, it rose much earlier, but it's still getting more popular, so okay, we can give them that. To political scientists in the United States, such as Rummel himself, the rise of communism and its spreading equaled totalitarianism and mass violence and death because of how communism in Russia spread to China and Cuba, causing violence to spread under the name of communism. They're kind of just dancing around the issue here, okay? Debatable, but then they get more specific here. China had mass starvation due to Mao Zedong's Great Leap Forward, his 5-year plan mandated after Stalin's. That's enough. And again, it kind of rambles. But another thing I want to point out, look at your space here. That's all you got. You get 1 page.
There's no lines?
There's no line. Well, no, there's lines. There's lines on the real thing. I'm pretty sure. I could be wrong. I don't know. I'm trying to think now. No, there. See, what I see when I grade them, it's a scanned version, and I don't know if the lines are. I don't know that there are lines. Huh. Anyway, the moral of the story is you got the box. And the box is not even as big as a full sheet of paper. You know, it's literally like the box.
Why did they cut off the?
Because they're evil.
Yeah, like.
Okay.
They're acting like I can't grab another sheet of paper.
Nope, you cannot. Impossible. Also, if you like put an arrow to something outside the box and that's what got you points, you wouldn't get the points because it's outside the box.
Wow.
And that's one of the things, guys. It's weird. And that's one of the reasons it's been hard to prepare. Normally, under normal circumstances, if we did SAQs in this class, I would give you a sheet of paper identical to that. And you would learn to, you got to write them in pen, which for some people is challenging because you can't erase, so you just mark through it. But also, you know, you do have to condense your answers. So your options are write really small, or really get into that ACE format or something similar where you can get a good solid answer in about 3 sentences.
So if I write something like, I hate the college board and they outside, they can't grade that.
I mean, it's people like me that grade it. So we would probably just laugh. Yeah, no, on the outside. I'll be honest, I don't even think we see what's outside the box. I think they only scan the box itself. It's weird. Point is, you've got to stuff it all in there. Now, here's some examples. I don't want to go too much into this because this will take forever, but this is what I don't like. First of all, you got to understand, we grade, I don't know, I think the SAQs, I think I usually grade about 1,000 of them, okay? 1,000 of one set of questions. This person treated this like an essay, and you could do that, but that drives the graders nuts. It's a lot easier on us for you to label it A, B, C, you can go in whatever order you want, but they're separate answers, and if they start bleeding together too much, you may not get separate points. Now, they get into, you know, enough here. They get the first 2. They did not get the last one because really they only address it back here. The reason that Rummel most likely believes this is because democratic states such as the United States fought against states that committed these murders such as Germany and Rwanda. We never fought against Rwanda. And we did fight against Germany, but we didn't fight them because they were committing the Holocaust. We fought them, for other reasons, due to their conquest, due to their alliance with Japan. So this, if they would have added a little bit more, they might have gotten it, but yeah, they didn't. In this last one, they do the same thing. They just kind of bleed it all together. But really, I think other than the first one, they don't get 8 points. Because from there, they get wild. Like, okay, so this first paragraph, that's cool. Hitler, Holocaust, awesome. That sounded terrible. Not awesome, but good answer. But from there, just okay. So the second one, however, democracies are capable of genocide as well. Serbia during World War I was a democracy that facilitated the Armenian genocide. First of all, debatable if Serbia was a democracy. Second of all, it was the Ottomans that were responsible. So even though he's identifying something, it doesn't work because it's not a democratic nation doing it. Plus, he's just kind of off on his facts. Democratic nations such as the U.S. are very big on fair trials. Many democracies, and he starts quoting, don't quote, nobody likes that. Dictatorships are able to kill who they please with barely a word from the public due to fear instilled in them. An example of such is a trial in a democratic nation like the promise and something about O.J. Simpson. We got a lot of these. A lot of these just talking about, they took one little snippet from the source, but they didn't look at the bigger picture. And plus, it doesn't really give us anything new. A lot of what he's saying is just ripping off the quote. And that's unfortunately what a lot of people do. They'll take a bit of the quote and they'll just run with it. Look at the whole thing, see what it's saying. All right, let's very briefly, because I don't want to keep you much longer, let's look at the second one. Now, this one is not nearly as bad as it seems. You got the picture, and you're like, what in the world's going on? But I'm telling you, anytime you got a picture, the title and the description, that's what you need. The picture itself is almost unnecessary. So, like I said, 1765, the British are meeting with the Mughals. The Mughals are hooking them up, letting them collect some taxes. And by the British, we're talking about the British East India Company. So think about what you know about the Mughals. Think about what you know about the British in the 1700s. Think about what you know about the British East India Company. A, identify one way in which the event depicted in the image reflects political changes in the global balance of power in the 18th century. Always remember, 18th century, that's 1700s. It's weird, but that will throw people up. So how is this picture a change? Sorry, it's hard to tell when people are not.
Sorry, I usually do this now.
Okay, say it again, live.
They're interacting with states, the different states trading.
Okay, you can get into that. You can get into that. Who's trading here? And are they even trading?
The English? You gotta figure this out. Muslims?
Yeah, they're Muslims. Okay, it's the Mughal Empire. But then you got to think, how does this represent a change in politics? Like who's powerful in the world?
Both of them are like the main leaders right now.
Okay, you guys are on the right track.
Always on the right track.
Think about what you know happens later. Okay, this is just the British East India Company
Conquer
showing.
India.
Who knows?
The British.
That was a trick we just said.
Ah,
There you go.
you're pranking me.
There's a lot of different directions you could go here. But remember, the British start off, they work through that joint stock company, they get into India. Gradually, the Mughal power declines and they fall apart. You could just write about the Mughal Empire falling apart. Gradually, the British take it over entirely until it's a colony. So you could talk about that. You could talk about the fact that, during this time period, Europeans are interacting directly with all these Asian nations, and Europe is becoming more powerful. I mean, this is the precursor to that big wave of imperialism. Again, they phrase it in a way that makes it sound worse than it is. Same deal here. Explain one way in which the event depicted in the image reflects economic changes in Asia. That would work. Now, you got to give more than that, but
Spice.
that would work. Okay, you could talk about,
Pepper.
pepper. You could talk about, okay, how traditionally these luxury goods in Asia, they had to go through intermediaries, but now Europeans can get to them directly. You could even take it a step further. This is 1765. Industrial Revolution's already started. It's happening in Great Britain. So when they go places in Asia, they're just not looking to buy stuff, they're looking to sell stuff too. That is a big flip from what it traditionally had been. Because for most of history, people are importing stuff from Asia and bringing it into Europe. But now, especially moving forward, when the British start manufacturing stuff, yeah, they're still buying stuff like tea. They love that stuff, but they're really looking for new places to sell their stuff. Okay, that's why they go to China. That's why they fight the Opium Wars. The Chinese wouldn't buy anything that they had, so they started selling them drugs.
And then they got hooked on the drugs.
And then they got hooked on the drugs, and it's just.
They were like, no more drugs for you. And they were like, but we want the drugs.
Exactly. And believe it or not, you could integrate that in, even though it's not in China. We're talking about the British. We're talking about imperialism. You could bring that in as additional. And they also did this in China, like for instance, that's the sort of way you can go. And then this last one, explain one significant way in which Great Britain's relationship with South Asia changed. Here's the thing, you can't have the exact same answer for more than one question. You got to vary it up a little bit. But the British coming in and taking over would work. That's kind of what they're looking at. So let's just real briefly look at some samples, and then we'll send you on your merry way. Again, on the College Board website, I've got all these samples, and I got samples for questions 3 and 4 as well, if you just want to look it over. But check these out when you get a chance. Just kind of seeing how people answer these questions, it'll give you ideas. So we're going to skip through, their explanation and all that stuff. Let's just read one. Because this first one, as I recall, is pretty good. Now, they go above and beyond, okay? They probably put a little bit more than they had to. They probably even wanted to put more. But, again, you can usually wrap it up in 3 sentences. Sometimes even 2. Sometimes, though, if you're kind of iffy on the answer, adding some more detail, maybe you'll just kind of luck into the Grader's good graces. But, okay, so the first one, this is the political one. The image reflects political changes in the global balance of power in the 18th century by showing the greater political power European trade companies had on the areas they controlled. Let me see what it says. Because if it just said identify, that would be enough. That would probably be enough. You want to be a little bit more specific, like area they control, maybe give a better answer. That's borderline. Just that first sentence, you might get it, but it's borderline. That's when the rest of the material really comes in handy. The British and the Dutch trading companies arrived in Asian states and had the power to collect taxes. They may not have even known that, but it says it in the picture. Institute their own political leaders and make decisions for the native population. European trade companies took over governmental roles in some Asian countries and shifted the political global balance of power. Not bad. The economies of Asia in the 18th century became based on the production of raw and luxury goods. I don't know if that's so much of a change with the luxury goods, but still, raw materials, yeah. Because now, rather than going after finished products, a lot of the reasons that the Europeans are in places like, India, they want raw materials like cotton to take back, manufacture, and then sometimes sell it right back to the Indians. So that does work. The British East India Company was focused on obtaining luxury goods like tea to then sell at higher prices in Europe. That would probably be enough. With European companies taking a lot of production in Asia, the economic revenue of Asian empires declined. Okay. The last one, Great Britain's relationship with South Asia intensified as India became the crown jewel of their empire. Again, a little bit more is obviously what you want, but, just a little bit more probably would have gotten the point. Again, a lot of times these questions, the ways they're worded in a way that will try to confuse you. The reason they put the picture here is to psych you out because you're like, man, oh my God, I don't know what's going on. But when you slow down and look at the captions and really slow down, I say slow down, you're under a time limit, but when you slow down and see really the basics of what they're asking, here it's just political changes. They underline it. Here it's just economic changes. That's pretty broad. Okay, you need to get kind of specific, but it's not that bad. And anytime you just see identify, do more if you can, but it doesn't take a whole lot to identify, technically. All right, do more if you can. If you got more details, throw them in there. But identify is pretty darn easy. The British gaining more power in India and the Mughals declining as an empire. That might be enough, maybe. I would do more of that. When you get a chance, like I said, just look over this stuff. We're going to do skill building in class 2. These are just a little bit extra that I like to do, at this point in the year. Next week, we'll focus, on essay writing. Okay, and we're not going to write any essays. Don't worry about that. But we're going to look at some steps and some tricks to kind of format your essays. Because on one hand, they need to be somewhat substantial. But guys, it doesn't have to be 3-4 pages. It doesn't. Most of these, like LEQs, DDQs, you can knock out, if you played your cards right, 3 or 4 paragraphs. Okay, sometimes even 3. Good solid introduction, couple body paragraphs. You can get all your stuff in there. They're going to be long paragraphs, but still, you don't have to kill yourself. Now, the more detail you can put in, that's going to put you maybe in that area of that last unicorn point. But as far as the rest of it, I mean, like I said, 3, maybe 4 paragraphs should be plenty. So we're going to look at that next week. Thursday, we'll mainly look at like document sourcing. Because like I said, that's something, it's so easy. You just got to be creative. That's really all it is. Draw on some conclusions that kind of sort of make sense. But yeah, other than that, we're going to call it a day. We're 9 minutes early. What do you know? This can be recorded. If you came in late, I'm going to post it either later tonight or in the morning. And like I said, we're just doing little snippets, but after we get through the content review, we're going to have about a week, a little bit over, to just work on skills. So all the stuff that we're doing after school, we're going to go into a little bit more in class. So if this feels super short, because it is, this is like the tip of the iceberg. We're going to go a little bit more into it. But other than that, you guys are free to go. Kids online, thank you for logging in. Like I said, I'll post a recording either tonight or in the morning. Y'all have an excellent day. If you got any questions, send me an email.
Oh, do we need to sign up for the walk exam?
Yeah, there's a thing in